Chapter 6, Strange Kinships. It was a serene, bucolic stereotype of a Canadian farm, complete with barn, horses, chickens, and pigs. Lude and Selma and a grandmother. To survey the scene would tell any observer that this was a place of utmost peace and thorough tranquility. But I saw it all in the shades of an ominous gray. It was eerie and threatening and dangerous to me from the moment I stepped onto the property. Lude, a friend of Cyrus's family, was larger than Cyrus, well over 6 feet and nearly twice as broad, with bulging muscles. An unsmiling brute of a man. Selma was continuously annoyed, a complaining shrew who found me to be a nuisance and nothing more. Grandma was a self-appointed disciplinarian, wagging her self-righteous finger at every turn. The farm, for all its charm, was an unforgettable place for me, leaving me ill at ease, as if I were wandering through some ill-fated Hitchcock movie. When Lude beheaded chickens, I could hear them helplessly scratching on the insides of the pail, their nervous systems expiring in frenzies of fits of kicks and tremors. I shivered. The sound seemed magnified in my mind, the claws of the chicken scraping metallically against the inside of my skull. The grandmother, still the supreme spiritual voice of her family, grew angry with me at the dinner table one evening and suddenly arose from her chair. She pulled me away from the place and yanked my trousers down to my ankles. In front of the 2 others, she spanked my bare bottom and stood me in the corner to stare at the wall. I stood in the trance of shame, mortified with humiliation, longing to go home, unsafe or not. And the telling trial of the summer? Chronic colitis destroyed my digestive process and all the hope of controlling my bowels. Although Cyrus and I had no blood link, it almost seemed as if his awful digestive problems had been handed down to me, as if by sheer meanness he could transfer to me the worst possible inheritance. From my earliest childhood, my intestines, prompted by nervous tension, knotted up stubbornly, only to relax capriciously without the slightest warning. I scrambled for a bathroom every time, but generally I arrived too late. Then, red-faced, my composure devastated, I peeled the filthy underpants off and washed them myself at whatever facility I could find. A faucet, a water pump, a creek. At home I found the most convenient route was to run down the ridge to the riverbank, even though I had often encountered other kids swimming and playing there who never failed to hoot and jeer as I did my dirty work. Now at the farm for the summer, with no explanation for what my body was doing to me, I found myself more nervous and more prone to such problems than ever before. As long as I could get away with it, I hid my dirty pants under the bed in the room where I slept, until Selma finally searched out the source of the stench and furiously washed them all. Soon Lude stepped into the picture, angry with me for upsetting my hostess, and declaring unilaterally that his was just a filthy habit and nothing more. He warned me sternly not to let it happen ever again. It was, however, literally out of my control, and the inevitable inevitably occurred. The brutish Lude seized me by the neck and left me clear off the ground. As I dangled like a rag doll, he stomped out the house with me toward the great circular rain barrel out the back. My stomach grew squeamish as I saw his purpose unfolding before me. Standing next to the barrel, cursing me ferociously, he thrust me down into the barrel with a single violent motion, submerging me completely in the cold water. My mind spun wildly as I struggled to hold my breath. His strong fingers were pressed solidly into my neck and shoulder. I could not escape if I tried. The full terrible range of possibilities flashed through my head, including the ultimate. Would he just kill me right here like this? My lungs began to burn, aching for oxygen. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I could listen to the death knell as it pounded through my skinny body. Wave after wave of terror and nausea swept over me in rapid succession, and my lungs felt like they would explode if they didn't get nourishment. Then, suddenly, his fingers tightened and pulled me out of the barrel. As my face broke through the thrashing surface of the water, a gulp of air rattled into my gaping throat. I coughed and sucked for more air desperately. But before I could recover, he had pushed me back down into the water. Again he held me under until my chest ached for relief, and again he hoisted me up at the last possible moment. I had barely filled my lungs with a swallow of oxygen before he had thrust me under the water for the 3rd time, and then a 4th time, until finally he felt he had made his point, and he set me down with a jolt beside the sloshing barrel and walked away. "See that you break that filthy habit," he muttered as he stalked up the porch steps into the house. I wobbled and sat down roughly in the dirt. leaning against the barrel, too traumatized to cry, too weak to stand up and wash my sloppy underpants. It was strange, but I would be glad to go home. 2 friends wandered into my troubled life, each destined for a tragic farewell. Skipper was the illegitimate offspring of a Labrador retriever and something else, a big, bony, black and tan dog who appeared out of the proverbial nowhere one day and apparently sensed in me a certain bastard kinship. He was never my pet, only my buddy. I never put him on a leash, yet he stuck with me as if I'd been expertly trained. It was a loyalty born out of commonness, magical and unshakable. We ran together, played together, and even though Skipper occasionally disappeared to sow wild dog oats in parts unknown, I was always sure of his return. It was instinct then that told me something was wrong. The air turned bland and still around me, and I knew in my gut that it was a problem with Skipper. From face to face I bobbed and throughout the neighborhood, asking every friend, every acquaintance if there was any news about Skipper, any information, any ideas. Someone said he'd been taken. I suspected from the beginning that he had been an owned dog at one time, although I never seen him tied up or in anyone's care. Now perhaps the Humane Society had picked him up and sold him, or perhaps he had been simply pressed into slavery by some evil human master. Old Ed Dupay, the story went, had Skipper tied up in a shed behind the Wincy Mill, where Ed worked, across the Nith River. If I stood on the ridge behind my house, I could see the top of the shed where Skip was supposed to be. I knew if I whistled for him, he would answer me. It was a whistle we always used, 3 short, shrill tones, and as I echoed down the ridge and across the river, I strained to hear the response. The wild, frustrated barking broke back across the river valley. My heart flopped, delighted to hear the old familiar sound, despondent with the mystery so sadly resolved. Each day for a week, I took my position on the ridge and whistled out the signal to my old friend. Each day without fail, Skipper barked wildly. I could imagine him straining at the chain, his neck muscles pulling against the choker, his paws scraping at the earth, but to no avail. Finally, I had to see him. I'd spent too many hours peering grim-faced across the river, and the mental pictures had worked me until I had to take the chance. Early in the evening, after a day's shift had shuffled out of the Wincy Mills, I sneaked around behind the little shed. When he saw me, he bounded to me, a gleeful puppy once again, if for only a moment. I hugged him as if he were a long-lost brother home from war. But I could not free him. It hurt me not to, but too many people knew we had been inseparable, and I would only have to turn him back over to old Ed Dupay if I slipped away with him now. Hot tears stung my eyes as I held Skipper for a final moment. Then I walked away from him, agonizing. He strained at the chain trying to follow, but I left by myself. There was an older boy named Bill, and he had no last name for all I knew. He hung around with kids younger than he. His pants were too short, exposing ugly sores on his legs. He was a sullen enigma that every town has and doesn't care for. As mothers wondered, what is he up to now? How is he influencing their children? He had been rejected at home and spent most of his time sitting on the curbs in neighborhoods like ours in Paris, talking in low tones to a few people who would carry on any conversation with him. As a fellow reject, I became one of the few. One day we looked across the river, silently, at the train bridge. In the warm autumn air with the leaves dying their beautiful autumn death, it was a moderately inspiring sight for 2 oddities like us. Finally, Bill quietly broke the picturesque silence. "How would you like to go for a ride on that train, Maury?" I looked at him in disbelief. I had never had such a stupendous offer in my life. "Gee, I'd like to," I answered breathlessly, but I could still hardly believe it. "You mean a real train ride?" "I'm going tomorrow," he responded casually, and we arranged a time the following morning when he would come by and I would be waiting outside the house for him. I was still astonished as I lay in bed that night staring into the ceiling, imagining the powerful chug of the great engine as it vibrated the floor of the train car beneath me, imagining the falling leaves whisking by and stirring up in miniature tornadoes as the huge wheels of the train thundered down the track through the woody areas. The next morning found me waiting for him in my little red cotton coat, on time. He came by as planned, and I fell into step alongside him, soon working up a little sweat to keep up with his long leg stride. When darkness finally overtook us, we collapsed under a tree in a random yard. I was tired, worried, and weak from hunger. We had not eaten since we left. I had a hard time falling asleep. The unfamiliar surrounding triggered my nervous system. As I lay awake in the grass, a shuffling silhouette appeared. Alarmed, I squinted at it. It was a grisly old hobo. His clothes disheveled, and his whole appearance created the impression of abandon and hopelessness. I was frightened by the old man, but he did not stop to bother us. We were just a couple of hobos ourselves as far as he could see, and he was essentially correct. He kept moving along. Finally, I fell into an uneasy sleep. Back home, Mom had realized my absence and had begun the inevitable search. Slowly at first, sure that she would locate me in some typical place. Then with a more and more urgent pace, as it dawned on her that nobody had seen me all day. Perhaps it would have solved some of our problems to be rid of me, but her maternal instinct did not allow her to arrive at that conclusion. She loved me still, in her own sorrowful way. Furthermore, Cyrus had demonstrated his true character in such a vile and consistent way over the years that Mom had little hope left for him ever to reform, even if I somehow vanished. The likely point of disaster, everyone knew, would be the river. Finally, Maury had slipped over the ridge, over the cement wall, and plunged to an awful death in the waters of the Nith. My brothers and sisters scrambled along the bank, peering intently across the river for my pitiful red cloth coat. A local radio station began broadcasting my description, urging the townspeople to be on the proverbial lookout. A troop of Boy Scouts fanned out to make a search of their own, each perhaps hoping to get a badge of merit for finding the body. Several people joined in the boy hunt, but the hunted boy was not to be found. By nightfall, Mum was despondent. "Good," Cyrus grunted when he heard I was missing. "I hope the black bastard is dead." Bill and I set out to cover more ground on the second day. I was deeply worried, wondering where he was taking me, how I would ever get home, and what Cyrus would do to me when I got there. But we trudged onward anyway, and I remained silent about my fears. "Hey, where you going?" a man shouted from his house as we walked through his neighborhood. "Woodstock," Bill called back. The man was walking toward us, smiling broadly. "Hop in my car, I'll take you to Woodstock." I was grateful. My legs were sore. As I settled into the upholstery of the back seat, I could feel my narrow muscles beginning to relax, finally. We sat in the driveway for a long time, waiting for him to come back out of his house and get us on our way. Then, without a warning, a police car pulled into the driveway beside us. My heart pounded as the policeman jumped out of the car and threw open our door. Before I could react, they had dragged Bill out and stuffed him in the squad car. "Are you all right, son?" he asked me in a friendly tone as he turned back toward me. My eyes were wide and worried. Yes, I'm okay," I told him, but I was scared. We were driven to the police station and taken inside, where I began to insisting that I had to get home. The chief of police was gentle with me. "It's okay now, Maury," he assured me. Then he turned to Bill, cursed him angrily, and demanded to know what the devil he thought he was doing by kidnapping a child my age. "Well, he didn't have to go," Bill whined. "He wanted to." The chief, red-faced with anger, abruptly kicked Bill in the rear end. My mother was mourning, sitting at the living room window, holding my little brother Cyrus, when she saw a police car pulling up the street with my worried face pressed against the glass. Startled, she stood up, losing her grip on little Cyrus, who tumbled to the floor and cried loudly. Mum dashed for the door to greet me. It was a good feeling to be missed, something I had rarely felt in my life. She poured a big bowl of porridge and set a huge Danish pastry in front of me to fill my empty stomach. I was worried about the old man, but it was Saturday, and Mum assured me he was over at the hotel drinking and could be counted on not to show up for a while. Bill disappeared forever, a victim of his own loneliness. Cyrus was disappointed to discover me alive and well. He was especially cranky for the next few days. I was particularly careful to stay out of his way, but Cyrus was growing old.